Okay, today I have a legend in UK Bitcoin, an absolute legend who hates being called that, which is why I've just called him it. So I've got Joe Bryan. Joe, before we get into the conversation, maybe you want to just give a minute telling people who you are, what you do, and a bit of your background.
Sure. As you say, most people know me, and which is still very strange within Bitcoin circles for What's the Problem? That was released a few months ago, and I think has got through most of the Bitcoin community now. I think everyone's aware of it, even if they haven't seen it, which is great. So people, I guess, think of me as sort of an educator to some degree. Prior to 3 months ago, I wouldn't have classed myself as that thing at all. But it's nice. It's nice that people have found usefulness in something I've created. My background before that, I did physics at university and then went into the investment banking world. Spent 10 years as a derivatives trader, mainly at Goldman, Morgan Stanley, and UBS towards the end. And then 10 years as an entrepreneur, founding and building and scaling businesses. Since about 12 months ago, I focus now entirely on Bitcoin. There's nothing more important to be focusing on from a non-family perspective than Bitcoin. And I'm in a fortunate position that I can dedicate all my time to doing this.
That's fantastic. Thanks. I've heard you on so many podcasts, and like you always speak so articulately, and you explain what's the problem so well. But rather than trying to do the same thing here, I'm quite keen to just explore more about Joe, the person, and a bit about how you got to where you are now. And the thing I ask all my guests, and you're going to be no exception, is like your earliest memories of money as a child.
Well, I mean, not having very much
Okay.
as a child. I never was really conscious that we didn't have much money when I was very young. I was very happy early years. But looking back, like we didn't have much money.
When you say not much, do you mean like Rishi Sunak? We didn't have Sky, or do you mean? Do you mean?
Slightly more like, yeah, we didn't have pillows on the bed when we were very little. So it's strange looking back. Looking back, my parents both Scousers, so I'm a big Liverpool fan. Never lived in Liverpool, but I feel like it's my home. But yeah, my dad grew up on a council estate in Liverpool. Did very well, worked very hard. Met my mum, teacher training college, got married early. Dad was a policeman, a teacher, and then I worked very hard to move up the ladder as a teacher, and hence why we moved around quite a lot as a child. I've lived in various parts of the north, so I have a general northern accent, as opposed to there's bits of Liverpudlian in there, there's bits of Lancashire, Yorkshire, and so we lived in Bolton, we lived in Wakefield, and then spent my teenage years in Hull. Mum had us, and then she always stayed at home with us and tried to do some jobs around it. And then as we were teenagers, she would work while we were at school, as an office worker in different roles, like clerical work, or work for Norweb. It's the old energy company, answering the phone and stuff like that. And my dad was, he was initially a policeman for a number of years, and then a teacher. But this is, when you're supporting a family, we had our own house and stuff like that, but there is not a lot of money to go around, but never felt short of it. And then, but as we got older, my dad was working in private schools, and so went from being a teacher to being a headmaster of a junior school, and then to headmaster of a bigger junior school. Hence why we moved. But because of that, we were fortunate enough to go through private education. But it was me and my brother, and so the only way we could afford it is because we got 2 for 1.
Wow. Okay.
And it being in the north, and so it allowed us to both get a good quality education in a way that we wouldn't have been able to, and make ends meet probably if Dad hadn't been a teacher.
Yeah. And did that experience give you exposure to other kids who came from much more affluent backgrounds?
Yeah, but that's certainly true. But it's much less so in the north than it is down
Right.
here.
Yeah.
Down where we live now, which is in Surrey, as you can imagine, it's a whole different level of affluence versus the north of England. And so, there's clear distinctions, but not the gap that exists down here with the proximity to London.
Yeah. So through your teenage years and going into early adulthood, how did your view of money and experience with money evolve through that period?
Well, it's a good question. This is like a therapy session, Gary.
I don't charge, Joe. I don't charge. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, this is a great bargain. You put me in for next week as well. No, I think I always felt like guilt around spending money or wasting money, probably because you're conscious of there not being a lot of excess. But also, I've always enjoyed trying to figure out how to make it. But growing up, I didn't expect to go into banking because I didn't really know what banking was. I had even the first clue because you don't come from a background that has any experience of it. My dad was the first to go to college, from his family, and for me then to go to university, to go to Oxford was like such like a massive win for the family as a whole. It was like, within a generation it's a big step, and I think proud moment for dad as well, mum and dad, because a lot of sacrifice went into making sure we had a good education and things. And so you are conscious of money, but not necessarily particularly well equipped to understanding it or making decisions around it, just being cognizant of it not being plentiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there being sacrifices made to make, like obviously sending two boys, even if it was buy one, get one free through private school, comes with, for most people, sacrifice, doesn't it?
It does if you want to own your own home, and not even a showy home, just a home, and have a car. We didn't used to we used to go camping, go and stay in a caravan for a week, something like that, in Cornwall or Dorset, not going on planes. But we finally went to America when I was 15, 16. We went to Florida, which was amazing, for 2 weeks, because my dad's brother lived there and we stayed with him for 2 weeks,
Nice.
which was like the first, international travel.
What I'm interested to know why you fell into physics. Like, was that something you were just good at school, or something you were really interested in, passionate about?
I always enjoyed physics. I had a good physics teacher, Mr. Thompson. And I think when you're at school, half your enjoyment just comes from having a good teacher. The right person can really bring a subject to life, or it can kill your passion for something. And so I was very fortunate to have Mr. Thompson for GCSE and A level. But I only decided to do physics at the very last minute. I was thinking about doing business/economics. So I've always been maths based. I hate writing, hate writing anything, writing essays. So for A levels, I did further maths, physics, business studies, and then general studies. Which is like general studies is like the pub quiz if anyone listening doesn't know what that is. It's, if you do no revision, you just turn up and it's a pub quiz for 2 hours, and you get an A level for it. And so, all the ones that required any work were maths based. But I love business. I love business. I always had a good business teacher. I forget his name. It's a Welsh guy, but he was. I haven't thought about this in years, Gary. So sorry, I can't remember his name. But he gave me a book when I was doing GCSE, and it was about how somebody had basically built a business, the challenges they'd faced, the innovations that they'd unlocked, and then the success they'd had, the failures, etc. So I absolutely loved that book. It was so inspiring that somebody can start with a blank sheet of paper and then go do something, and it's on them. You go and create something. You go and create value, and we don't get taught that at school. It's effectively rote learning. It's like course curricula, as opposed to critical thinking, real entrepreneurship, the self-starter, you can do something, you can create something that doesn't exist. It's just not there, and it wasn't there for me. But this book, I was like, this, you can actually go and do these things. And my dad's brother, he had left Liverpool and emigrated to the US when he was probably late teens, early 20s. And then he'd moved to Detroit, and he built a big business in making bumpers for cars. So, so growing up, I always had my dad as the teacher and his brother as the entrepreneur. And so I always felt like I had it in me, like it was in the family. We could go and do this. You could go and do those things. There were different routes open to you. And I think growing up for children, just knowing something's possible is important.
Yeah, completely. Unless you're given exposure or information or just can see and breathe and hear those things happening, how do you even know they exist? Otherwise, you just assume, well, I have to go and work for someone that's doing that. Of course, I could never start something like that myself. And I don't think school, certainly when I was at school, that wasn't anything that was included in any curriculum or encouraged.
It's changing a little bit because you get more apprenticeships and things coming through, and different routes other than just going to university and getting saddled with a massive amount of debt, which is totally uneconomical for the value you get out of a degree. The scales are tipping somewhat and forcing people to go down different routes. But school is not the best environment for engendering that sort of thinking within children anyway, because the people you're getting taught by don't have those skills. They're in teaching because they're not entrepreneurs. They work for the state. If it's a state school, they're civil servants, and it's a safe path. You can be very passionate about it, but it's a safe path. It's not a risk-taking path, and entrepreneurship is risk-taking, right? There isn't a safety net unless you have a big red button. So
We might come on to that.
yeah, I go to that. And so yeah, it is a shortcoming of the school system generally, that people don't get enough exposure to wealth creation, how wealth is created. Because poverty is the default state. So the question should be, how do you create prosperity? Not what causes poverty. It's the other way. It's the other way around.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's massively undervalued is happiness in the job, doing an activity that you enjoy doing, even if on the face of that isn't necessarily going to give you a massive income, because there are always routes. Well, wealth has to be balanced against happiness. If you spend 40 years doing a job that you get that sick pit in your stomach on a Sunday night when you go to bed, it's not, however much you're being paid, it's not worth it, in my opinion. But yeah, so often people follow a passion, and that becomes either a very successful financial result in their life, or it gets them by, but actually the slightly limiting factor of their wealth is massively offset by the fact they're doing something they're so happy doing, so passionate about doing.
That's certainly true. I mean, it's horses for courses, but there always needs to be an economic rationale or an economic minimum that
Yeah,
you need
yeah.
to hit, unless you live in a socialist state.
Well, or unless if mummy and daddy have got enough money in your trust fund that you can go and be a charity worker in some far-flung country, and then and that's what you really want to do, then good luck to you. You're in a fortunate, privileged position to be able to do that. But the vast majority, people aren't.
Yeah, I would term that a much smaller socialist state.
Yeah, quite.
Same principle, same.
Yeah. So you going from doing a physics degree to investment banking, was that mostly financially motivated?
Well, it certainly was financially motivated. When you're going through university, typically the end of the second year is when you would then go and do an internship somewhere, in an accounting firm or a bank or a law firm, or whichever career that, if you had decided upon at that point, going the direction of. So if I just wanted to go and work in a bank for money, I'd have already made that decision, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to be a physicist. I didn't want to spend my life underground, but I liked solving problems. And so I was sort of, you see all these other people at university who are like, I'm going to be a lawyer, or I'm going to do investment banking. I struggle to even explain what those things really were, because I had no natural understanding. They were not in my background in any way. You grew up in Surrey. Your dad's worked for an investment bank for 20 years. You have a sense of what it is. I had zero. These were just words to me. Like, you have no idea. You have no idea. And so I was sort of struggling to decide where my future would lie. But I loved bookmaking, love maths, I love sports. And so there was, to go back a little bit, Gary, I toyed with, before getting the offer from Oxford, and I couldn't really say no, I toyed with going to Salford to do gambling studies.
Okay.
And Salford, I guess it was probably a polytechnic as opposed to a university, or recently switched over. But it was the only university in the country that offered a course to do with gambling, to bookmaking. Because I used to work in William Hill in Hull.
Okay.
When I turned 18, just in the shops. Just loved the maths, loved the sport. Didn't enjoy gambling, but it was being the bookmaker as opposed to being the better, which is, because it's just a challenge. You've just got to be better than the other person.
Yeah. I'm sure that was a quite a short conversation with your parents, wasn't it? I can either do physics at Oxford or gambling studies at a polytechnic in.
Well, it was, but my mum and dad love a bet. It's funny because my dad, we're big Liverpool fans, and we used to have season tickets when we lived. Well, when my gran was still alive, and we used to go to Liverpool every other weekend, and we'd have two season tickets. So my dad would go, and then he'd take me on my brother on alternate weekends. But you can always bet in the stadium. And it's just pre-internet as well, so you get a little betting
little
slips.
slips. Yeah.
And so every week for years, my dad would put £5 on Rob Jones to score the first goal for Liverpool. I don't know if you know your football, but Rob Jones never scored a goal for Liverpool in his entire career. Every week, my dad used to put this on. It wasn't even attractive odds, and every week I'd be like, "This, you're just wasting your money."
Were you not tempted to offer your dad those odds and take the £5 yourself?
Yeah, 40-1, but he was a right back. He never even went over the halfway line. 40-1 to score the first goal. I don't think he even had a shot in all the time but I was like, even that, I was like, you want to be the bookmaker. You don't want to be the better. Yeah, well, I'm fully enough on that story now. He's adopted Joe Gomez as his new Rob Jones, who has also never scored for Liverpool apart from an own goal. He scored an own goal, but they don't count. So yeah, in my second year, we had some optional courses, and everyone had to choose one. But I chose financial physics, which was the derivation of Black-Scholes equation, which is what underpins option pricing, which has its roots in Brownian motion in physics. And I was like, this is really interesting. And then so I was too late to apply for any internships because it was the summer term, the final term. And so I just spent the summer in Hull working in a pea factory, working half the time, reading option books the other half the time, getting to the point where I really understood this stuff and was clear that's what I wanted to do. And then I just I only applied to Goldman and Credit Suisse at the time. Like, you come from a background, Gary, you don't know how you're supposed to do these things. Right, so you should be applying to 10 banks. Like, I was just like, well, I know those two. I'll just apply to those. And I was very fortunate to get in because most of the people get hired have done the summer internship because they get to try you out for 6 to 8 weeks over the summer, and then they hire the good ones. And so God knows how I managed to get a job offer without having done that, but I was fortunate enough to get one from Goldman. And Credit Suisse only replied about 3 months about 3 months later, and I was like, well, I've already got a job, so thanks. That's how yeah, and then went there and spent 5 years in, on the other side. But you just get dropped into this world that you have absolutely no idea how anything works, because nothing up to that point has prepared you for any of the content that you come across, other than critical thinking skills and deduction and mathematical competency.
So through that, fast forwarding to you discovering Bitcoin, how does your first day at Goldman as a fresh-faced options trader or whatever, through to understanding what money really is and how Bitcoin is money and fiat isn't? How did that journey evolve?
Well, not at all. Not at
Until
all.
you left banking.
Until way after. I'd left banking, I'd started my own business with a co-founder, and then scaled that and exited that before I even engaged with Bitcoin properly. So you'd think people inside banks would understand money, would be questioning what it is, would be thinking about the world critically, but it doesn't happen.
I guess there's no real incentive to do that, is there? There's no reason on the face of it, and no incentive to question what everyone around you is saying you do and how things work. And why would you do that when you've chosen to go into that environment? You're not going to try and break it apart from within, are you? It's just not.
But you don't even know it needs to be broken apart.
Yes,
This
yeah,
is
good
the
point.
thing. It's not like people are aware and it's like this secret that no one talks about. It's like people are just not even aware. You specialize very early on when you go to a bank. You'll join a desk or a department, and then you will start to learn about what that desk does, the product it trades, or the product it sells, or what the department is focused on. But it's starting almost with the minutiae, and then you grow your expertise from this very esoteric, minute area of content. It's not like you start from the top and you go like, all right, first day, what is money? And then you go from there. It's completely the opposite. You start from the smallest of details and the greatest level of specialization. So to try and connect that back to what is this big red button that none of us are talking about is such a massive leap. Because also a lot of people who start in investment banking, they don't come from an economics background. They come from maths or physics or engineering or computer science. Or you have no framework for anything other than I just have money in my pocket, I spend it, I try and put it in the bank. And so from the outside, people probably think investment banking stuffed with all these people who really understand money and understand the system and just choose to just screw everybody over by being the close to the money printer. They're not even aware of it.
Do you think that's changing though? It must be to some extent.
But absolutely is, because Bitcoin is making inroads everywhere, and to say that nobody inside investment banks understands the abusive position that the state is in and that the banks can benefit from would be wrong, because they do, and they leverage it as much as possible. But for the vast majority of people, they would probably just look at you blankly because they're so specialized, or they don't have enough experience, or they haven't had time to really take that step back and think about it, because being an investment bank is like 100 miles an hour. You don't get a lot of time to sit back in your chair and reflect on some of the big questions of our time, like what is money. You're sort of constantly picking up the phone, doing things, then working long hours, rushing home to spend time with your family. There's not a lot of free mental space, and
Yeah.
I always found that
You don't have the need, do you, either? So you're being well rewarded. If you're doing a good job, you're being probably heavily bonused. So the life you're leading and the wealth that you're creating, you don't really have to question that or worry about it, because it's that constant gravy train of income, hard work, but you don't probably have to consciously worry about store of wealth, because there's always more wealth around the corner.
I think that's true to a degree. I think most people adjust their output to their input. So, if you look at people who are in investment banks, you probably think, these guys are super wealthy, got lots of savings. Often they haven't, because their lifestyle expands in line with their earning power. And they'll buy a big house and they'll have a big mortgage, and all the kids will go to private school, they'll go on 3 international holidays every year, and they feel poor. Like the cash security, or like the asset security there, may not actually be very big. From people's lifestyles expand to match their earning power. And so you would have people with big mortgages, credit card debt, lots of foreign holidays, lots of children in private school, multiple cars, where they're actually not really wealthy. They've taken on lots of liabilities. And this is potentially very dangerous, because you get fired or there's a financial crash or something, you're stuffed.
Yeah.
You're stuffed.
And with interest rates, anyone that was on a 2% mortgage and bought a much bigger house through COVID for that, 5-year fix, when that comes up, they're maybe one of those cars or that foreign holiday might need to go.
Yeah, but it's tough. And so, not everybody does that. People are more prudent. They see it for what it is. But this is why people sometimes get stuck in these careers for 30 years. You think, surely haven't you got to a point where you can take a step out and do something that you don't hate anymore? And they're like, no, I'm stuck, because everyone's used to this lifestyle. I can't not deliver that as the primary breadwinner.
Yeah, and back to that point about happiness as well. For most people, those material things aren't actually making them or their family particularly happy in the grand scheme of things. It might make them look better on social media or make their neighbours a bit jealous, but it doesn't actually drive happiness, particularly when, dad's getting up at silly o'clock on a Monday morning to leave everyone to get into London, and they don't see him very often and he hates his job.
Yeah, it's keeping up with the Joneses, and no one's happy in that scenario. But so I did that for 10 years, but the first couple of years were really exciting, interesting. And then 2008 came along, which was just insane. It was just insane.
At this kind of front end, what did that feel like?
Felt like the world was ending, and you were at the epicenter of it, because these banks are so big. It's like 100 different businesses all under one wrapper. So you probably know the 20 people closest to you on the trading floor. You don't know the other people on the trading floor, and you don't know the floor below and the 5 floors above. You are carrying the risk of everybody else. And so, I was trading equity derivatives. We were making a lot of money for the bank, because when things are volatile, like MSTR, it is valuable. And when the world is falling apart, people are panicking left, right, and center, and lots of trading activity. Really wide prices, low liquidity. If you know what you're doing and can risk manage properly, then it's a great time you can do that very profitably whilst managing risk. So market making effectively in these complex products, which is what I loved doing. It's like being the bookmaker. This is all partial information everywhere, and I will show you a two-way price. I don't know whether you want to buy or sell, but this is where I think it is, and this is what I know about where I can offset the risk. And but doing this dynamically all day, it was a wonderful experience, but incredibly draining and impactful. It was probably 6-9 months of incessant volatility, uncertainty. It got to the point where I hadn't eaten in like a week at work. And my wife said, "Why can you not go out for lunch? It's so busy, we cannot leave the desk. We cannot even send the junior to the sandwich shop to get sandwiches for him, because it's so busy. Like, we have to run to the bathroom and then run back again." And so for probably about a month, I took a massive tray of sandwiches to work every day. My wife would make sandwiches for the desk, and I would take in these sandwiches every day for everybody. It was that level of insanity, really. And then it began to calmed down. But during that period, it was a lot of stress, a lot of personal stress, because we had just had our first child. We'd bought a house. We had a mortgage. My wife was staying at home looking after our daughter. And you're the breadwinner, and you don't live an extravagant. We've never lived an extravagant lifestyle. That's not how either of us were brought up. It just doesn't seem not where we get enjoyment and fulfillment from. But you still have to make ends meet. You still got to keep a roof over your head. And for months, you'd go to work wondering whether the bank would be there at the end of the day. And that's, there's a lot of mental load, and still being pulled from pillar to post during the day as well, because it's just so stressful. And so, yeah, it was a really, really trying period. Coming out the other side of it and surviving was great, but the world had changed. The big red button had been pressed. Volatility then went to zero because asset prices just started going up. Everyone had de-risked. The banks were getting pushed with more and more regulatory changes to inhibit any sort of profitable activity at all. And then I'd end up doing that for like another 5 years, basically just trailing down to zero volatility. So the last few years it was just going through the motions, having to take less and less edge and more risk just to try and eke out a small amount of profitability. And it was just like, I'm doing the same thing every day. I'm doing it because I've got 2 small children and a mortgage, and I just need to reach that point where I don't have to do this soul destroying thing anymore, and I can take a step out. So yeah, that's where I got to. But my route out of it was sports. So when my wife was pregnant with our second, she would be going to bed at 7:00 in the evening. It's like totally wiped out, and then I'd be sat there thinking, oh, what do I do? So I started to see whether I could model what happens in a football match from a mathematical perspective, the likelihood of certain things happening. Initially, it was a bit of fun, and then it sort of grew and grew and grew, and then I built a model, and I thought, oh, this looks mathematically sound. I wonder if I can find something to test it against. I found bookmaker data, historic bookmaker data on the internet, and then I started just testing it against. Oh, okay, well, it seems to be better than what the bookmakers can produce. And then, one thing led to another, and it's like, this is my route out. This is my route out. I'm going to move into sports, and ended up leaving the city and founded a sort of quant engineering business with a partner, a guy I met who'd done the same thing. He'd been at Morgan Stanley for 15 years as a fixed income derivatives trader and structurer, whereas I was equity derivatives. So same mathematical foundations. He was an engineer, whereas I was a quant trader. And we said, well, we should just do this together, and we'll write the models. We'll figure out modeling the things that other people can't see or haven't been able to join the dots on. And then we'll put real-time engineering under it, and then we'll build the business out of it.
So you're the king of the hackers, are you?
I certainly wouldn't say that. They predate us, but we ended up writing models to price things that other people weren't able to price, because they had a level of mathematical complexity that was hard to capture consistently. Derivatives trading is really all about inference. That you can see scraps of information, and quite often all you need is scraps of information when you have a model to pass them through. It's like anything it's like, what's the problem? When you see all the issues and then you have a framework within which to place the issues, you can then get back to the source. And then once you understand the source, you can figure out the other issues that come from it. A derivative is exactly the same. You can see 3 or 4 different option prices, and from that, with the model, you can reverse engineer what that must mean about the underlying contributing variables, which all combine in non-linear ways to each of those 4 prices, but you can reverse engineer them out. And once you've got the variables, you're going to price anything. And so sports is very similar. It's very similar. So derivatives trading to sports is a logical is a logical step, not an illogical, a logical step. And then we grew that business fairly quickly. And within a couple of years, we'd been acquired by our biggest customer. And then we spent the next 5 years growing that, helping to grow that business.
And it was through that period, or was it after you'd moved on from there that you discovered Bitcoin?
Well, it was during that period. So we exited to this other company. And we exited to this other company because we saw the growth potential in that company, especially when we were in the room as well. Us joining them was a better outcome for us, and we could grow faster being part of them than being separate because of what we could unlock for them. And they already had this growth path, which was shaping up to be phenomenal anyway. And so it was just like putting steroids, putting rocket fuel under what was already working. And so that was, we were acquired in 18? But then it was 2020 during COVID when finally got Bitcoin, but not like today. It's not like you have a level of conviction that you have now. It's sort of you actually put the work in, even if you approach it from a purely, this is a financial trade where I can see the price go up because I think everyone's going to see the price go up. I'm going to drive the price up because of the characteristics of Bitcoin, and then I'll sell it and I'll earn more fiat telos and I've got to do something else. And that was the lens. But then the more you go down that route, just conviction builds slowly, doesn't it? You know this. It's not like one day just something clicks. You're like, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. It doesn't. Well, certainly for me, and I would guess for most people, it doesn't. It's not like an on-off switch. It just evolves over time.
It's a volume switch, isn't it?
Yeah, and the volume's at 11 now. Because it takes time to piece it together, because also the educational material is ever evolving as well. Every year it gets easier to make those connections and to get to a point of high conviction in a shorter period of time.
Well, and there are just more people that someone knows that is a Bitcoiner or actually, so just everything as the network grows just becomes that bit more accessible and easier to get your head around or to get exposure to, I guess. So go back 10 years and, at most there'd probably be some article on the BBC website about someone's lost a lot of money through scammers in crypto or something, whereas the narrative has just moved on so much now.
It has. I mean, it's like molecules in a gas, Gary. They're all moving around randomly. And if you have one orange molecule and the rest of them are white, the chances are most of the white molecules never bump into the orange molecule. Right? And you need to have multiple collisions normally to become an orange molecule. But then as soon as one changes, you have doubled your efficiency. And so what naturally happens over time is everyone becomes an orange molecule. It just takes time. We've got to try and maximize the number of collisions that everybody who's not had any collision so far has, with as many orange molecules as possible. Because I suspect for you as well, you probably had multiple touch points before you bothered to put in the work or actually start to think critically or give it the time and space that it very clearly deserves, but you never knew deserved until you actually did it.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to asset allocation and kind of Bitcoin maxi, it always interests me with these conversations, because people at different stages of life, it's harder for some and easier for others to put more of their net worth into Bitcoin, say. So speaking personally, a few years ago, I started investing really heavily into my pension with bonuses and everything else. I've got quite a bit of equity in my house. So the available liquid assets as a percentage of my net worth are maybe smaller than someone else or the average person my age. So how do you rationalize those kind of situations and decisions that people have?
Yeah, it's a good question. And even before finding Bitcoin, I'd written off my pension. I think pensions are going to be worth zero.
You mean full stop?
Probably.
So even you think even someone who's got MicroStrategy in a SIP like me just needs to write it off?
I think there's every chance you never see any value for it.
Wow. Okay.
No, because it's going to get stolen.
I agree with that sentiment,
Yeah.
Joe, but and my view on it, maybe it's hopium. My view on it is the older you are, the less likely it is to be completely robbed.
Yes.
So I'm 49. I can access my SIP in assuming, I'm still here and assuming the rules or everything doesn't change completely.
Yeah.
At 57, I can get at that. Is your view that even in that relatively short time frame, probably everything's going to go so haywire? You're nodding, Joe. Violently nodding at me.
But yeah. I mean, you can already pensions are a Ponzi scheme. State pension is a Ponzi scheme.
Yes, 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Private pensions are a arbitrary construct.
They're a
Inside,
wrapper. They're a wrapper that the government has constructed to enable people to save tax now to try and create wealth for themselves in retirement. So,
yes. So
and
it's an arbitrary construct in a tax wrapper. Okay, that only exists through the good graces of the government. Okay, we already see the real value of pensions being undermined and have been undermined for the last 10 or 15 years. Meant to have the triple lock, these sorts of things, but the real rate of inflation is not what gets used to rebase all these things annually. We've seen the pension age pushed back multiple times, and we are at a point now where the system is really creaking. We are going socialist. To think in another 16, 17 years, the pension age isn't going to get pushed back again, potentially materially, that the tax breaks on pension contributions will remain as attractive as they are, and the tax on drawing down your pension will remain as it is, really hopeful, I would say. Because they're a pool of capital the government can steal, because they're going to have to bail everybody in. So
yeah,
they steal it in a variety of ways. They either print money and debase the real value of people who are already drawing down their pensions through annuities, right? So you debase it away. The people who haven't converted to an annuity yet, the money printing will drive the assets higher, but the government will then impose caps on the total amount that you can have in a pension, and they keep reducing that. They introduce more and more tax penalties for that. The growth in the assets accrues to the government, not to you. And by printing money, they reduce your percentage of real wealth that you get to keep after you've paid the taxes. It's a horrible combination. And so even before Bitcoin, I was like, I'm never going to get to retire. These guys are never going to keep their hands off whatever I sacrifice today. So I've never, I've contributed some to my pension, but I'd much rather have it today than not have it tomorrow, even if it's less tax efficient. But then Bitcoin is the only way you can get around that. You can have Bitcoin in your SIP, as far as I understand.
you can't have Bitcoin. You can have MicroStrategy,
Sorry, not SIP.
ISA. You can have it in. You can have. Well, you can have MicroStrategy in your ISA, but
Sorry, slight difference. You can have Bitcoin if you are a company director through a company
SaaS.
SaaS, and there you can actually hold the keys. You can hold the keys, and we all lose our keys. I've already lost my keys in a boating accident.
Yeah, I was on that same boat with you actually. It was a nice.
So many of us. I mean, I can't believe it. But that's the point. That's the point. You retain optionality in a way that you can't if you're invested in pieces of paper stacked on promises in a tax wrapper in a pension.
I guess that's that was kind of part of my question, was that if what you say happens in the next few years and my SIP goes to zero, then not by definition, but the likely outcome is also that the Bitcoin that I've unfortunately lost has probably also gone up a large amount of money, because for the fiat system to completely implode, something else is going to replace it. That something else is inevitably Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, you'll be doubly upset because you've lost the keys there. So I don't know.
Well,
I
yeah,
don't see how
obviously.
it's a hedge for you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll buy some between now and then. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, but yeah, yeah. You can't trust the government.
Yeah.
You can't trust the government. So
Do you also think, though, Joe, that the socialist aspect that you're talking about, do you think that's slightly recency bias, or do you think that's a trajectory we've been on and it's unstoppable and we're going to go that way? Because obviously America has put a bit of a handbrake on that.
well, they thankfully, I mean, I think we'll probably look back as that being probably the most crucial election of our time, because if they were going off a cliff, I mean, lost all sense of connection to reality across so many different topics. And so we're getting dragged back now in a direction where, you don't necessarily agree with everything, but the pendulum is swinging back to where I think most of the population, if they were free to speak their mind, would think is the right place. Just hopefully it doesn't swing too far back the other way. But Europe is very much going down that socialist route. Same with the UK, and it again, it's because of the big red button. You print money, you drive wealth inequality that accrues to the people connected with the big red button. You drive, extreme political outcomes because people don't understand what's happened, and then they vote for the person who's going to give them all free money. That's what happens, and then you destroy society because there is no free money. It's just theft from other people. And you can, I think we all recognize there's a wealth inequality, but it's not because some people in society are necessarily evil or some people in society are good. It's because the big red button exists. That's the reason. So you don't solve it by stealing from people. You solve it by removing the big red button. You would not go into your neighbor's house and steal all their silverware because they are wealthier than you. But that's what you're talking about. If you introduce wealth redistribution, that's what you're talking about. You're making the government do it, not doing it yourself. It doesn't solve the problem. The same issue is going to happen again.
And eventually, the people that have the wealth don't have it, and the people that took a proportion of that, the less well-off people, still aren't getting more affluent. So everything runs out.
Yeah, it's you destroy society, and it always shocks me that people fall for this. I mean, it's like very, very simple example, and I've used this with my children to try and explain why equity doesn't work. Is that if imagine you're in a classroom and you're all sitting a test, and then first day you sit the test, whatever mark you get is the grade you get, and then the teacher says, right, we're gonna institute socialism/communism. Right, everyone's going to get the average grade of everybody. So next day, everyone sits the test. The children that worked hard and were either naturally talented or worked hard would have got an A. They now get a C. The kids who didn't try or didn't show aptitude would have got an E. Now they get a C. They're happy. The top performing children are unhappy. What happens next day? Next day, the top performing children realize, why am I bothering? Why am I bothering doing the work? And the kids at the bottom of the class, they feel the same. I don't need to do the work. Everyone else is doing the work and I'm pulling my grades up. So next week, the average is a D, and then it's an E, and then it's an F, and then no one's even bothered writing anything on a piece of paper. The whole thing collapses. It's a race to the bottom. Just very simply, if you do not allow people to succeed, it spells the end for everything.
Yeah. I think the other link to the UK with that analogy is, rather than the kids that got an A in the first day coming back and trying less hard, they might go to a different school the next day that doesn't implement that scoring policy. And then it's the same outcome in the school that you've described. It's the same outcome, but it's probably quicker because the average drops a lot faster because the brightest and the hardest working go to other schools that recognise their efforts.
Socialism always fails. Communism always fails. I say always fails. Communism works, Gary. It delivers what it says. You all become equal. Equally poor or equally dead. That's it. And so, fortunately, we are going in that direction as a country. Europe is going in that direction. And CBDCs and ultimately poverty is what lies in that direction.
So how do you approach that personally then, Joe? Are you looking at other places to move to? I mean, how do you sleep at night with that level of certainty that these things are coming?
Despite that last statement, I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic because we can actually do something about this. If Bitcoin didn't exist, it would be a very depressing world because we are going off a cliff driven by the government. But with Bitcoin, everybody can individually separate money and state. You can opt out. No one can take it away from you. It's the only thing you can own. And so I'm very optimistic for the future because I know everyone else is ultimately going to get there. And so the challenge is, how do we help as many people get there as quickly as possible? Because there's room for everybody in Bitcoin, and yeah, it's the only solution. But when we are in a Bitcoin world, everyone's going to be optimistic. Everyone's going to be optimistic because you see the benefit of your actions, and when you put in effort, it benefits everybody else. Who doesn't want to be in that world? It's very clear to me. So I'm super optimistic. I just shake my head at the government and the misleading rhetoric and framing of social issues that sort of capture the minds of the population, because they, in large part, have not been given sufficient framework in which to question them, because it's just been indoctrination since the day they were born. And, I would consider myself as being part of that at some point in time. As like most of us, you have this sort of awakening moment where you actually begin to question things critically. But everyone's going to get there, and we just have to help as many people as possible.
Well, unfortunately, I know you've got a pretty hard close, which is unfortunate. I feel we could talk for at least another hour.
Yeah, I know.
Before I let you go, I do have a question that I ask everyone, which is, what's one belief you held before Bitcoin that you've completely changed your mind about?
Probably something like the system isn't set up to steal everything. The system is absolutely set up to steal everything over time. And that is very deliberate. But that only becomes apparent when the pennies drop with Bitcoin.
Yeah. And for anyone wanting to start on that journey, here's a nice little segue. There's a video on YouTube called What's the Problem?
Yeah.
By someone called Joe Bryan that has helped a lot of people get to that place a lot more quickly. Before you go, Joe, where's the best places to find you?
Just Google What's the Problem, or go on satversusfiat.com. That's the same handle on YouTube and X as well. Please just watch the video, share it with as many people as possible. It is despite me clearly having views about, on the political spectrum, on both ends of the political spectrum, just to be clear, however big the government is, it should always be smaller. The video is politically neutral. It doesn't have any sharp edges. Anybody can watch it. Anybody can understand the problem. The problem affects absolutely everybody, regardless of who you are, what you think, what you believe. We're all equally impacted by it. So please watch it, share it, and then start to learn about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the way out of this for all of us. But start with a blank sheet of paper, because you probably think you know about Bitcoin already, or somebody has told you something which has influenced you. Remove all that from your head and approach it with a fresh pair of eyes. I'm here if anyone wants to ask any questions. Just drop a comment on the YouTube channel. I'll reply to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. It's been great spending more time with you.
Yeah, likewise.
We'll have to do this again, this therapy session, because we ran out of time to cover everything else. So.
Well, you could tell I haven't got a therapist, so apologies for the spilling of information.
No, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon, hopefully.
Lovely. Well, thanks for having me, Gary.